7 deaths, a studio fire that left one room mysteriously untouched, an actor warned by a priest, if you reveal the devil, he will seek retribution. This wasn't even part of the film. This was what happened off camera during the making of one of the most terrifying movies of all time, The Exorcist. They called it cursed, and when more details started to come out, it only made some people believe in it more. When The Exorcist hit movie screens in the 1970s, it redefined the horror genre, leaving audiences around the world shocked, disgusted, but above all, terrified. And that visceral reaction to this movie wasn't just because of what they had seen on screen, although that did plenty to traumatize an entire generation who managed to see it behind their parents' backs. But it was also because of the strange events reported on set during filming. Talk of mysterious fires and floods, of injuries, of even a string of tragic deaths all surrounding The Exorcist. And I mean, with a story that dark, a little girl possessed by a demon, it's easy to see how the line between fiction and reality could start to blur. And this left people questioning, had something followed the film off the page and onto the set? But what really is the truth behind it all? What really happened? And why does this film still haunt Hollywood over 50 years later? There is something that not a lot of people know, and it's that before the film, there was a book, a novel actually, written by a guy called William Peter Blatty, which was published in 1971. But this book, called The Exorcist, which is where the movie obviously got its name from, was actually based on a true story. A real exorcism case which took place in 1949, involving a teenage boy in Maryland. And so this lad, he didn't vomit pea green soup or throw priests out of windows, but his case became the inspiration for Blatty to write the novel. And so we're going to be getting into the real exorcism behind the movie in the next part of this, because there is just too much to tell you about the movie itself. But after publishing his book, William Peter Blatty went on to sell the rights to the movie to Warner Brothers for $641,000 on the agreement that Blatty would adapt the screenplay and produce the movie himself. And so while the novel had been inspired by the 1949 exorcism case, and so by extension of that the screenplay had too, we're getting into like properly based on a true story territory. There were details that were changed. The possessed was a 12-year-old girl rather than a 14-year-old boy. Things that happened during the alleged possession and exorcisms were wildly sensationalized to, you know, make it a horror movie. And we also will be talking spoilers here, so if you haven't seen The Exorcist yet and you are planning to and you don't want it to be spoiled, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. The film's been out for 50 years. You can rent it on YouTube for like £3.50, so stop putting it off. But if you are truly not bothered and you don't know what happens in the story, basically a 12-year-old girl, Reagan McNeil, who lived with her mom, started acting really weird, just off. Funnily enough, after she had been using a Ouija board and had made contact with an entity called Captain Howdy. And Reagan's behaviour was just getting worse and worse, swearing, being violent, speaking in tongues, like all of that sort of stuff. The doctors couldn't explain it, and so her mom, Chris, who was desperate at that point, turned to a priest, Father Karras. He teams up with an experienced exorcist, Father Merrin, to perform an exorcism. Things really build up, it gets super intense and deadly. In the end, Karras sacrificed himself to save Reagan by telling the demon to come and possess him instead in a sort of pick on someone your own size kind of deal, before throwing himself out of the window to defeat it once and for all. William Friedkin was brought on to direct the film because Blatty had wanted someone who was going to be brutally honest and would shoot the film in a way that would give it that feel of reality. Not quite a documentary, but you know, it wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that this could have been real. This could have happened to anyone you know, kind of thing. In August 1972, production started on The Exorcist, with Friedkin pulling out all of the stops to make sure the movie was as realistic as he could possibly make it. He had the set of Reagan's bedroom refrigerated so that you could visibly see the actor's breath, just for that extra little bit of atmosphere that didn't need to be added in post. But he also apparently had a wonderful habit of hiding guns around the set, and at random times, without any warning, he would fire the blanks in the gun to get those proper terrified reactions from the cast. I used to have a teacher who actually did a similar thing, obviously not with a gun, but he had a hammer and he would go around the classroom while we were working, and so you'd have your head in your books concentrating, and there would be this almighty like smack on the desk right next to you, and you'd have just this spontaneous out-of-body experience from the sheer shock of it all, and you'd look up and he'd usually say something like in the nicest tone. It's like, wow, that is an excellent displayed formula. Well done. Or on the other side, it would be, what on earth have you done with that reaction equation? Good times, reminiscing. Don't feel too bad. He was actually my favourite teacher. Long live class of 2014 A-level chemistry. The morgue, right on. But still, the hammer had what I'm guessing was the same effect as Friedkin firing the gun did. We were always on our toes, and perhaps slightly wary. But this commitment to real emotion didn't stop there. Oh no, far from it. Actually, at the expense of the safety of the cast. Linda Blair, who played Regan, would end up fracturing her spine when the harness that she was strapped into for the scene where she's like thrashing about on the bed came loose. And so the mechanism thing was repeatedly smacking into her back, and the fracture led to her suffering with scoliosis and chronic back pain after that. That take, where the fracture happened, was actually included in the final cut. And so Regan's screams were actually real screams of pain as the mechanism hit the fracture over and over again. I just cannot even imagine that pain. But she wasn't even the only one. Her on-screen mother, Chris, played by Ellen Burstyn, was also injured in the name of realism. They'd been filming the scene where Chris was thrown back onto the floor by Regan. And so Ellen had this harness attached around her waist, and then the special effects technician, Marcel Vocateur, was behind the curtain with a wire attached to that harness, ready to pull her back. They did a take, it wasn't quite right, so Friedkin wanted to do another. And Ellen, at that point, was a bit like, this doesn't seem that safe. I really feel like I'm gonna get hurt. It's too much. So Friedkin was like, yeah, no, of course, like that's fine. We'll take it easy. Don't worry about it. Apparently, when Ellen turned to walk away, seemingly satisfied with this exchange that she'd just had, Friedkin turned to look at Marcel in a kind of way as to say, like, really give it to her this time. Which, when the camera started rolling again, Marcel did and yanked her back. So Ellen flew backwards and landed on her coccyx, causing permanent spinal damage. That take where Ellen got injured also ended up in the final cut. And you can kind of actually almost see Ellen reaching for her back once she's on the floor. And that's only because instead of cutting the cameras immediately and getting her medical help, they pulled the camera closer in to capture the very real look of pure shock and pain, until Ellen, quite rightly, started screaming at them to turn the fucking cameras off. Honestly, she got damn lucky that she didn't end up with worse injuries from that. Her head looked like it was dangerously close to that set wall. Other injuries on set happened too, including a carpenter. He accidentally chopped his thumb off, and a lighting technician lost a toe. And there were also other incidents, like a fire that broke out on the set in the early hours of the morning, when there was no one on site apart from a security guard. The fire destroyed the majority of the McNeil house interior, apart from Regan's bedroom, where the exorcism and things take place. And so people thought that that was mighty strange, how it could have just inexplicably caught fire, and how only Regan's room was left intact. It's just all very weird. Although it has got to be said, Regan's bedroom was built separate to the rest of the house. I'm assuming because they would be filming a lot in there, and so they would need like more angles on the room itself. I'm not entirely sure. But they also later found out that a pigeon had flown into the circuit box, as there were pigeons living in the rafters of the building where they were filming. And the poor thing had unfortunately flown in, obviously died, and caused a short circuit. This was a major setback for the production though, as they obviously then had to rebuild the set, which took 6 weeks. Once they'd got all up and running again though, there was, obviously, a sprinkler system there, and in an interview, Friedkin said that there was one time after the rebuild where the sprinkler system was triggered, inexplicably, and it flooded the set. And so then, there were even more delays. And it wasn't just the set itself being difficult, there seemed to be just inconvenience after inconvenience with this production. You know, when there always just seems to be something. I'm sure those of you who do a lot of DIY can relate. Just always something going wrong, jobs always end up bigger than initially thought. It was kind of just like that. The opening of the movie is set in northern Iraq, and as part of one scene, there's a huge 10-foot tall statue of Pazuzu, the demon. This prop had been built in California, and was obviously supposed to be shipped out to Iraq so they could use it in filming. However, the statue got lost in shipping. I just want to know how you lose a 10-foot winged demon statue. But that meant, yet again, the production was delayed, something like 3 or 4 weeks while they tracked down this statue. There were other stories about the entire shoot being delayed from springtime into July, the hottest month for Iraq. And so then that caused issues with crew members dropping from heat stroke and such. But as they started filming in August 1972 and wrapped in March 1973, I'm not entirely sure about that part. But aside from that, with the brutal injuries and other incidents that happened on set, there were some people who were starting to believe that something was going on here, something perhaps a little more otherworldly. There just seemed to be too much going wrong. And let's not forget, you're filming a movie about a demon. That's kind of gonna be playing on your mind somewhat. Even the special effects technician, Marcel, he said that he felt like they were playing around with something that they shouldn't be. William Friedkin, he said that it was the hardest shoot of his career, being plagued by strange and sinister things right from the beginning. But apparently, the atmosphere with the cast and crew got so bad that Friedkin actually got a Jesuit priest to bless everyone there. He was called Father Thomas Birmingham, and he was on set as a technical advisor, making sure everything was accurate with the exorcism itself and things like that, as well as having a small acting role in the film. But the priest, he was initially asked to do a full-on exorcism, which he was like, nah, I think that's probably going to do more harm than good in this situation. Not to do with anything supernatural though, or anything like that. More that it would just most likely really scare the cast and crew, who were seemingly already in a little bit of a vulnerable state, and he just really didn't feel like it was necessary. And so this blessing, this sort of like toned down version, was just supposed to calm everybody down, like, you're okay, you're spiritually protected, everything is all good. But I do feel like that just kind of goes to show what the atmosphere was like, at least with some people on set. Filming finally wrapped in March 1973, taking 200 days, which was twice as long as it was supposed to have taken. It also, unsurprisingly, completely blew the budget out of the water, costing about $12 million. But still, even though the cameras had stopped rolling, apparently there were still strange things going on. Friedkin claimed that in post-production, there were really weird double exposures on Reagan's face at the end of one reel that, considering the subject matter, were extremely unsettling. And I'm sure was just only adding fuel to the fire that by filming this exorcism for the movie, they had actually invited something over from the other side. But up until this point, everything I've told you about, it all just seems like a series of unfortunate, albeit extremely chaotic events, right? Steady on there, Lemony Snicket. But it wasn't just freak accidents and production nightmares that had everyone feeling on edge about the whole thing. Because alongside the injuries and the setbacks, there were deaths. Not just one or two, but multiple people connected to the film died during or shortly after production. The first fatality connected to the so-called curse was Jack McGowan, who played Burke Dennings, the director who was working with Reagan's mom Chris on a movie at the time. Jack's character Burke is actually killed by Reagan while she's possessed. She breaks his neck and flings him out of her bedroom window and down this huge flight of stairs that are just outside the house. Spoilers, I told you, you were warned. But on the 30th of January 1973, 1 week after filming his final scene, the one where Burke is killed, Jack passed away from complications with influenza, aged 54. Another cast member who passed away was a lady called Vasiliki Maliaros, who played the elderly mother of Father Karras, the priest involved in Reagan's exorcism. She died just over a week after Jack McGowan had, on the 9th of February. But it is worth noting that she was 89 years old and her cause of death was said to have been natural causes. But aside from the two cast members, Linda Blair's granddad died during the first week of filming, and then Max von Sydow, the actor who played Father Merrin, he got word that his brother Axel had died on the first day of him filming his scenes, the 24th of September 1972. So then he obviously had to go back to Sweden to attend the funeral. More production delays. A night watchman working at the set, he apparently died, although I'm not actually sure if he passed away on the location, and I have no other information about who he was anyway. But Ellen Burstyn did say in an interview that it was the janitor who looked after the building. He was shot and killed during production, so I'm thinking that might have been the night watchman, and that's where that story came from. Alongside him, a set technician who was looking after the refrigeration system that kept Reagan's bedroom cold, he also passed away during filming. And then there was a really sad story about one of the assistant cameramen. His newborn baby died during the production too. Ellen Burstyn did actually go on to say in her interview that there were 9 deaths that occurred during the filming of The Exorcist, but we don't have any more information on who those 2 extra people people were. Either way, you can just imagine that that's going to add fuel to the fire. People working on this film about demonic forces, and then the people around them are dropping down dead. There was very nearly another death that would have been added to this list too, though, as Jason Miller, who played Father Karras, his 5-year-old son was in a horrific incident. He was playing on what was said to have been a nearly empty beach. I'm assuming his parents were close and just keeping an eye on him at least, but when out of nowhere, a motorbike hit the boy. Luckily he survived, but he had really awful injuries and was in intensive care for weeks afterwards. And I think, looking at the times and things, it would have been his son Jordan Miller, who actually passed away in January 2024, aged 56, after being hit by a bus. I mean, talk about just absolutely awful luck. But going back to The Exorcist, that unfortunate series of curtain calls wasn't even the only connection with death that the movie would have. Paul Bateson, he was a real-life X-ray technician who played the radiologist's assistant in the movie while they're doing all the tests and things on Reagan. But after the film's release, he went on to murder Addison Verrill in 1977, who'd been working as a film industry journalist and critic with Variety magazine. Paul had met Verrill at a New York gay bar and had gone back to Verrill's apartment where the murder had happened. It was suspected that Paul Bateson may have been responsible for other murders of gay men at the time too, as 6 other dismembered bodies had been found wrapped in plastic bags and thrown in the Hudson River in a series of killings known as the bag murders. But there wasn't enough evidence to convict Bateson of those murders too, so he only went down for Verrill's death. He's out of prison now though, by the way. He was released in the early 2000s. But there was another murderer connected to the film too, because yep, there is more than one. It was the son of Mercedes McCambridge, the voice actress who Friedkin had wanted to perform Reagan's voice during the possession scenes, just to give it that extra little demonic flair. Just a bit on Mercedes though, as it's quite sad actually. She initially really hadn't wanted to touch the production with a barge pole, being a practicing Catholic as well as a recovering alcoholic who had gone sober. She was eventually convinced to take the part, and so she actually started drinking again, as well as smoking heavily and swallowing raw eggs to really add the pizzazz to Pazuzu. However, she did have 2 priests on hand, and after each take she would go to them and just cry because of what she was doing, which it just sounds so sad. What a situation to be in. But then in 1987, so long after the movies come out, it would get so much worse for her. Her son, a futures trader called John Markle, was found out for embezzling money from his workplace. He was funneling that money into an account in his mother's name. Just way to implicate her. But as it was all coming to a head, he could see he wasn't going to get away with it, and so he killed his wife and their 2 daughters before turning the gun on himself. Not before writing a scathing letter to his mom, Mercedes, accusing her of never being around when he needed her, and so now, quotes, "I and my family are dead, you can have the money." Which I honestly just have no words for that. And so with all of that death and misfortune going on behind the scenes, some of it happening during filming, like the injuries, some happening after, like John Markle and Paul Bateson, there was already the perfect foundation laid for what would become such an infamous curse. And with the film's release, as cast members did the interview circuits and audience reactions started to come out, it was about to get a whole lot worse. The Exorcist premiered on Boxing Day, of all days to release a film about demons, on the 26th of December 1973. And right away, some critics were just tearing the movie to shreds. They were absolutely disgusted with it, just flabbergasted. But I mean, that drummed up a lot of interest, and people flocked to the theatres to see what had got the critics all riled up. And a lot of them would live to regret it. Almost immediately, there were reports of people fainting in their seats, of bath bags being handed out in the lobbies of the cinemas. One theatre manager in LA claimed that he'd never seen anything like it in the 47 years he'd been working in the industry. Plumbers were constantly on call to unclog all the vomit from cinema bathrooms. Apparently, St. John's Ambulance, a voluntary medic charity in the UK, were on site during screenings. A woman was said to have miscarried from the shock and stress of seeing the film. And one story claimed that a cinema goer fainted, broke their jaw on the seat in front, and then tried to sue Warner Brothers. There were rumours of people claiming to be possessed after watching the film, and a man in Scotland allegedly attacked the cinema screen as he was convinced it was evil. It just sounds sounds like the mayhem from the set that they had gone through during filming was now just running rampant in the big wide world, right? As another example, there was a 16th century church opposite a cinema in Rome that was struck by lightning during a screening, which then caused the cross at the top of the spire to break and fall into the plaza. And with all of that just happening, like, what on earth has Blatty and Friedkin created? What have they unleashed? What exactly was in this film to cause this kind of turmoil? And of course, people being the curious, morbid little creatures we are, they wanted to see what all the fuss was about. They'd heard stories of audience reactions, they went to see The Exorcist, they in turn were horrified, creating more stories about audience reactions, and the cycle just kept feeding itself, pushing the movie to be almost an instant hit, grossing about $193 million in the USA and Canada in its initial run, which was a lot of money back then. It equates to over $1 billion in today's money. So naturally, no one was going to put a stop to those stories. They let the rumours and things of what the audience was going through watching this film just snowball and let the notoriety grow, and then just sat back and laughed it all the way to the bank as it dragged even more people into the cinemas to see the film. But just to say, these stories of mass hysteria all came from news outlets and things that were reporting on the reaction to the film at the time. Even the lawsuit, I couldn't find any solid information on it that didn't come from just newspapers mentioning it. And so I do think that perhaps some of these reports are exaggerated. Like some of the scenes of the film, I do think, would make people feel unwell, especially watching this during the early 70s. But whether the fainting, the vomiting, the possessed in the aisles chaos was actually legit, or just a textbook chef's kiss marketing hack for the hottest new horror movie, we do know for absolute sure that it seemed to impress the awards circuit too, seemingly despite those initial critics' reactions. The Exorcist was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, the first ever horror film to be nominated for that one, and it went on to win 2 of the nominations, Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Sound. But it also won Golden Globes, it swept up at the Saturn Awards. Despite that initial disgust, it had clearly done something right. That said, I can't talk about the film's success without also mentioning the price it came with, because I wouldn't exactly class the way that Friedkin approached certain scenes as ethical. And I know his whole thing was realism at all costs, but when the cost is the safety of your cast, it really just rubs me up the wrong way that the scenes where Linda and Ellen got hurt were included in the final cut. I don't know if they gave their permission, like they had the final say, like, and they were okay with it, in which case then, alright, fair enough. But as a general rule, I don't feel like you need genuine pain to make something look real and convincing. But anyway, aside from the initial audience reaction and the overall critical success, The Exorcist and the reputation that it had gained had more of a lasting impact too. This wasn't just a case of, oh, you need to sleep with the lights on after watching it kind of thing. Some churches apparently reported an increased attendance as frightened people turned to religion to try and ease their fears. Just kind of going to show how much people believed that what they had seen was real. Whether they actually believed the movie itself, or that the movie had acted as a conduit to allow evil paranormal forces into the world. Some people went so far as to start directing their anger and fear at Linda Blair, who was 14 when she starred in the movie. They were saying that she was glorifying Satan, that she was the devil, all of this. She was actually getting death threats. It's hard enough being 14 years old. I remember that being a particularly hard year for me growing up. I cannot even imagine going through all of that from grown adults on top of that too. But just taking a step back for a moment, I know that I've said a lot at you already, all about everything that went on connected to The Exorcist, all of the issues on set, the injuries, the tragedies, and then the hysteria after its release, to whatever degree it actually was in reality. It seems almost inevitable that people began to piece together all of this drama about one of the biggest movies of its time and start talking about a curse. But there were other reasons that led people to believe that there was something supernatural going on here, and that it wasn't just bad luck. One such line was that actual demonic voices which had been recorded from a real exorcism had been added to Reagan's voice. Which, I mean, come on, if you're playing demonic voices to audiences of millions, someone's gonna think that that is just dusting off the welcome mat for Satan to drag himself out of hell for for afternoon tea, right? Friedkin did touch on this alleged exorcism tape, and he said that yes, he did have a tape in his possession which contained the voice of a 14-year-old boy, supposedly possessed by a demon. And while he didn't confirm that he had used the actual tape in the movie, he did claim that he'd used the tape to emulate the sounds for Pazuzu. But I mean, surely, like, for a lot of people, that would have been close enough. There are actual demons in this movie now. This did lead to a bit of outcry that The Exorcist must be evil, with Billy Graham, the televangelist, saying that the power of evil was in the fabric of the film itself. How could it not be? Other more spiritual, religious people said that, well, of course the movie's cursed. You can't be imitating a demonic possession and a ritual, pretending that this demonic energy is all around you, without attracting negative entities. Not even full-on demons in the Hollywood sense, but just malevolent energies and things. And so you've got all of these more paranormal reasons why there could have been a curse surrounding The Exorcist, why people swear that there was something dark going on here. But what if it wasn't supernatural at all? What if there was a much more human explanation to all of this? Just look at the landscape of the time, where fear of the occult was alive and well. You'd just had Rosemary's Baby come out in 1968, another infamously cursed movie. People were genuinely worried about demonic forces, and then The Exorcist comes along with a story about a demon attacking an innocent child, and then to find out it's based on a true story. This isn't vampires or aliens, this is planting the seed that this thing could happen to you. And seemingly, with the stories of all the mishaps during production, it had been happening to people involved in the film. And then this was just blown into the stratosphere with the media just taking it and running. Stories of priests condemning the film about an exorcism would make an incredible headline, even though the Vatican's response had been relatively neutral considering the overall themes that good eventually won over evil. But it was only going to be a good thing for marketing the movie, and in turn, the production's bottom line. Friedkin apparently said during filming that the best thing that could happen would be if the Pope denounces it. And so really, some believe that the curse thing was just basically a marketing angle, just another way to drum up as much interest as possible, controversial or not. All press is good press or something like that. So maybe it just wasn't a curse at all. Maybe it was just confirmation bias. A few strange events, a few accidents, and suddenly everyone's convinced that there's a demon. Starting to sound like a paranormal ghost hunting YouTuber now. But it's human nature. We want to find patterns. We want to make sense of seemingly random incidents. We want to rationalise and have a reason why this thing is happening. The shoot for The Exorcist went on longer than it should have. Okay, 200 days still isn't a huge amount of time, but with the number of people involved in a big movie production like this, over that amount of time, things are going to go wrong. People will get sick. People will get injured, especially with the lack of health and safety on set at the time. People are also going to die. It's tragic, but it's also life. Can we really blame the movie for that? Or are we just drawing lines between dots that were never connected to begin with? Just as an example, John Markle, Mercedes McCambridge's son, who killed his family, he was wearing a Halloween mask when he shot his wife and kids. Do we blame that movie instead? Or do we blame Nightmare on Elm Street, the film that was found in the VHS at the time of the murders? It is also hard to think that demons would be super aggy about The Exorcist. Okay, they get defeated in the end, but they're still shown as powerful, terrifying forces, you know? It kind of leaves you wondering why they would take such offense to this movie, and if they had, why wouldn't they target, I don't know, Friedkin? Stop him from making the movie altogether, rather than just faff around a little so the movie still gets produced, just behind schedule and over budget. But, I mean... Then again, just when you think you've got a rational explanation nailed down, something weird pops back up again. Jason Miller, the actor who played Father Karras, had a strange little encounter of his own, one that is a little more tricky to laugh off. While filming The Exorcist, he used to visit this small restaurant in the Jesuit quarters in New York. One day, he was just going about his business and he was approached by a priest, someone who, by all accounts, had no idea that a film about an exorcism was even being made. It was still in production. No one knew about it really at that point. The priest handed him a small medal of the Blessed Virgin and said, "Do you know why I'm giving you this?" Miller was pretty confused and just said no, why? And so the priest went on to explain that there's a concept called intervention. If you do anything that exposes the devil for the trickster that he is, he will seek retribution. He might try to stop you, and this medal will protect you, so be careful. Okay, thank you. They both went about their day after that though, and that was that. A few days later, Jason Miller was walking down a hallway. I don't know which hallway, I'm guessing somewhere he was staying during filming. Anyway, he noticed a casket in a room. After he'd walked past, he stopped, and he just thought to himself, surely I didn't just see a casket in that room, did I? He walked back to the room, and sure enough, there was a casket. He went to look inside to see the priest dead. The same priest who had given him the medallion just days before. And just like that, we're back to that fine line of, oh, don't worry about it, it's just an eerie coincidence, and something else, something larger, darker, and more paranormal surrounding the Exorcist movie. But as always, I want to know what you think about this all, because I don't know about you, but I had absolutely no idea just how much actually went on surrounding the Exorcist. I'd heard about the fire and the injuries, and then the vomit in the cinemas, but that was about it. I had no clue about the murders, the setbacks, any of the other bits and pieces, but now I can absolutely see why people still talk about this movie being cursed. First and foremost, the subject matter itself is based on a real-life exorcism. If any piece of creative work is gonna become cursed, it's gonna be something like that, surely. But then the other side of me says that it's a demonic horror movie during a time where there were a lot of people afraid of things like that. It's like hopping on a viral trend, marketing the movie based on what's going on in the world at that point. You can see why it exploded, why all the alleged reports from movie theatres around the world came out, and why this curse became urban legend. The director, Friedkin, mentioned in interviews that the production was plagued with things going wrong and whatnot from the beginning, kind of almost playing into the whole curse aspect. But he's trying to promote the movie. Of course he's going to give the people what they want. What I found really interesting was that Linda Blair, she said that she never felt anything weird on set, never had any sort of negative force or anything like that. And then Max von Sydow, he said that, yeah, you have a short production, a few weeks, nothing will happen. But then you have a production that stretches on, accidents, things like that, they are going to happen. And so bottom line, do I think that the Exorcist movie is cursed? This one did actually make me stop and think for a little bit, but my answer is still no. I think it is just a case of confirmation bias again. You have a few bad things happen, so you start looking for more bad things, and eventually it all becomes so overwhelming that, well, clearly it's cursed, right? It was really tragic that multiple people died connected to this production, but like I've already said, it was a big project, a lot of people involved. Statistically speaking, there are going to be at least a few people who know other people that died during that time, like Max von Sydow's brother, like Linda Blair's granddad. They're not actually working on the movie themselves, but they're lumped into the curse because they have a connection to someone that is. I also think that with The Exorcist, the power of suggestion plays a lot into it as well. It's a film about evil paranormal forces. It's like when you go to watch a horror movie and then you go to bed that night and every house noise and bump and creak is a ghost coming to murder you. That's immediately where your mind goes because of what you watched, isn't it? And that's not even getting into the commercial benefit of having a curse associated with this horror movie, keeping The Exorcist on people's minds 50 years later. Although, obviously, the film stands up in its own right. I actually watched it for the first time last year during my research into Ouija boards, and I enjoyed it. I watched it in the day, so that may have reduced the creep factor a little bit, but I would still give it another watch again. But as for the curse, it is probably the closest I've come to thinking that maybe there is something going on here, but it's still not quite enough to make me fully believe in the curse. There's still just too many other explanations. But please do leave your own thoughts down below. I love hearing your take on things. And if you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving it a like. And as I said at the start, we're not done talking about The Exorcist. I've got to get into the true story behind the novel, so if you fancy hearing about that and you're not already, then maybe you'd fancy subscribing so you don't miss it. But anyway, that is all from me today. Go get a drink of water, flush out those demons with a bit of hydration. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. I don't have the blanket set up today, so now she's like not sure what to do. I'm just gonna dump all of my cat fluff all over you and then just leave. That's probably what you're thinking, isn't it?